So, Orcs Must Die Deathtrap has been out for a little more than a week, and there's one question that a lot of fans are asking. Deathtrap, good or bad? If you skim through the Steam discussion board or the subreddit, you might find that the hot topics have to do with map sizes, or the barricade limit, or even the sense of progression. Deathtrap is a mix of Orcs Must Die Unchained and Orcs Must Die 3, in the sense that you can play with more than 2 players like you could in the defunct Orcs Must Die Unchained, and that the gameplay loop is almost identical to the scramble game mode from Orcs Must Die 3, except instead of getting one large buff after each map, you now get 5 minor buffs or threads each map. If you're unfamiliar with the scramble game mode, here's how it works. You play a set of maps that provide you with both buffs and debuffs as you progress, with the bad guys getting a little bit harder to kill with each map. It's simple. Now, I'm not an Orcs Must Die 3 enjoyer, but what I can say is that the buffs you get from the original scramble are so big that they could radically change the way that you play. Instead of having game-changing buffs like doubling your damage entirely, the threads that you get in Deathtrap are things like you get 1 more rift point, or you can raise your barricade limit by 1 or 2. But probably the most game-changing thread that you can get is an upgrade that allows your barricades to upgrade into the wide barricade, which effectively doubles your barricade limit. Personally though, I still don't feel like that's enough barricades to make the game quite as enjoyable as the previous titles. Now, before we really dive into barricades, I want to bring up kill boxes, which are the bread and butter of the Orcs Must Die series. Those familiar with tower defense games will know these as smaller areas of the map where enemies are tightly packed together so that they're basically put into a blender of different traps. Generally speaking, you typically want to put your boxes in an area where you can gather enemies from different spawn points together. For example, the second map in Orcs Must Die 3 features a map with 2 spawn doors that funnel into one larger hallway. Now, assuming you're going for efficiency, you would spend the bulk of your defenses in the hallway right after the 2 paths join together. But unlike in Deathtrap, you also have the flexibility to place traps and boxes in a ton of places, and you can still do okay. Not great, but you can still do okay. The one thing that makes these kill boxes way more effective is the barricade. It's a barricade that forces most of the enemies to walk around it. You do need to leave a path open for the orcs, otherwise you're going to run into some serious trouble. In every other Orcs Must Die game, the barricade would take up one of your trap slots and would cost a little bit of coin to place down, and you would need to play this balancing act between placing barricades and adding traps until you get far enough along to really kind of expand however you want. And that's not to say that you absolutely need barricades. I actually went into Orcs Must Die 1, 2, and 3 in the weeks leading up to Deathtrap's release to re-experience the feel of each game and to beat the first and the last level without using a single barricade. And while that might seem really dumb for anyone that likes tower defense games, after playing Deathtrap for a while, it's clear to me that Deathtrap is the only title of the series which forces you to either use barricades or you just lose. In Deathtrap, you're limited to between 16 and 22 barricades, which depends on how many players are in your party. With the base amount, in most cases, you barely have enough to funnel all of the lanes together. Side note, as I was editing this video, they released patch 1.0.9, which adds in the new Rift barricade, which buffs your nearby traps as well. But after some testing, it became clear that they don't really want to compromise on their barricade limit. The Rift barricade costs 3 to 4 times the amount of any other trap. A step in the right direction for sure, because people were asking for more barricades, but this is not exactly it. Anyway, carrying on. Some people disagree, but I've seen the opinion that the barricade limit hinders your creativity, and I totally agree with that. I end up using the same barricade placement over and over on each map to kind of funnel all the enemies together at the very end of the map. I mean, if I don't, I'm really punished for it. Part of the issue is that maps are so much larger than they used to be. I mean, let's take a look at one of Deathtrap's maps. They're all pretty large with at least 4 spawn doors, and look to see how many branching paths there are. There are so many. You'd be an idiot not to consolidate your defenses as tightly as you could. because it's literally the only way that you could survive that. The large maps are cool, they're so cool, but in reality, you won't be using most of the map. Any side rooms that you might find, any potential rooms with ceilings and walls that are just out of the way, you're never going to be using them. They might as well not even exist. But you might wonder, maybe the progression system outside of just killing orcs is good. You know, leveling up your heroes, leveling up your traps so you have an easier time later. Well, I promise I will get back to this topic, but first I want to give you some context to compare by. So let's talk about the apparent black sheep of the Orcs Must Die series, Unchained. I can't seem to tell if it's beloved or hated among the fan base, but I probably have the most hours of all the games in Unchained, like by like a lot. Its services ended, but at the beginning of its lifespan, it featured a MOBA game mode called Siege. Now, stop me if this sounds familiar. It was a 5v5 game mode where minions would push through 3 to 4 different lanes with gates and towers, or guardians in the case of Orcs Must Die. And there were even jungles with side paths that had mini bosses that your team could kill to give your entire team buffs, while keeping the traps that you could place in Orcs Must Die fashion. It had a colorful cast of 19 characters of all shapes and sizes, from TNT fleeing dwarves to some sort of amalgamation of spirits whose abilities would require orcs to die around you. I mean, look at Bianca here, which is one of my buddy's favorites. The self-proclaimed Queen Mama of the Orcs. Each one of these characters even had their own signature silly-ass dance and custom skins that were a part of the Orcs Must Die series. As much as the orcs yelling, "Mommy!"
Whoa, this has to be some sort of record.
Dude, this is... Deathtrap has no dances, Deathtrap has no costumes, but Deathtrap has power poses? I mean, what the hell are these? I have some choice words that I won't say, but from a player and fan perspective, I'm just sad. I'm just really sad at the state that Deathtrap is in. I mean, just look at these new player notifications that they added in the last patch. I'm no game dev, but surely there was a more, I don't know, elegant way to present these? Now back to Unchained. I might be wrong here, but I think that they pivoted away from Siege to focus on its more traditional PvE game mode after a while. Although they did have Sabotage, which had 2 teams on different instances of the same map. I mean, you would never see the enemy team, but you could buff or send enemy units to the other map, much like you're dropping blocks on your enemies in Tetris. But how are these PvE maps in Unchained, you might ask? Well, let's take a look and compare all of the easiest and hardest maps of each title. The maps that I think were the hardest in my opinion, anyway. Now look at this map from Unchained. It might look like it compares to any of the maps in Deathtrap, but nearly every room on this map could be made into a kill box. I could start with barricade placements like this, and with no barricade limit, as the match progresses, I could expand my barricades and having the map look something like this using more than half of the map. And in Unchained, they would place tons of pre-placed traps with multiple charges, like you could send 10 boulders down a flight of stairs or explosive barrels out of a wall somewhere. Deathtrap does not have a single pre-placed trap. Where are my Indiana Jones style traps, Deathtrap? Where's my giant wall of grinders that I'll never use? I mean, I never use them, but it's so cool that they're there, you know? The loadout in Unchained gave each player 2 magic tools, which Deathtrap took away, 4 unique abilities, 2 consumable items like scrolls or summons, potions, and each player also got 2 giant tank guardians with unique buffs. My favorite of which was this giant farmer and his gang of chickens. Players could also level up like you would in League of Legends, so you could dictate how you wanted to play your character in any given map. Here's the tree for my favorite character, the Catgirl Assassin Midnight. Now, if I wanted to play a more tanky role, more frontline role, I would take these. Where if I wanted to slow down the enemies and earn money for a lot of traps, I would pick these. It was flexible, creative, and you could play it by ear. depending on how each map went. After each run in Unchained, you would get skulls to upgrade your traps, like in any other Orcs Must Die game, but you would also need these card pieces which you would get after each run, which would unlock or help you upgrade your traps. It wasn't really a perfect system, but it gave you a reason to play constantly. Something unique to Unchained was the trap part system. You could find trap pieces which would allow your traps to be upgraded in a different way from any other players. It was pretty cool, but maybe I'm glazing Unchained too much. I mean, it's gone. Anyway, let's see what Deathtrap's progression looks like.
The rift crystals no longer. Ah, Vaughn. Ren was looking for you.
Alright, I think I only have one more to upgrade, and it's this guy. And
Let me know
done.
how this performs. For the order.
Alright, that's all of them. Now what?